So those holes in the roster that I was referring to, I think that Alabama has a couple of things they need to do if they're going to continue to build a successful roster for next season, right? As of today, we have 11 guys on the roster. I think that a few of the starting spots are definitely solidified. Obviously, Aiden Sherrill is going to be a starter. I think Taylor Bowen's a starter. I think Jalil Bethea is a starter. I think those are the only three that I can guarantee will be starters for next season. There is a world in which I could see Aiden Holloway be a starter. There's a world in which I could see him coming off the bench again. As of this very moment, I would assume he does start. But like I said, there is a world in which you pick up a wing and a guard, and just so happens that it works out that Aiden comes off the bench again. Like I said, as of this moment, I would expect Aiden to start. That may change. We'll do what I think the roster is going to look like once the roster is officially set. I'll kind of do projected starters later in the summer. But as of this moment, I think that's what I'm looking at. So what that really tells you is we're missing potentially a guard and we're missing a wing, right? When you're looking at the guard standpoint, the LP, umbrella kind of hangs over, right? There's a lot of reports that LP potentially is considering coming back. There's also some reports of, hey, he's 100% in the draft. From what we're hearing, sometimes it's, hey, LP doesn't really know if he wants to come back to school. So, sometimes we've heard, if he's not going to be a top 20 pick, then he's going to come back. But then, LP kind of thinks about, do I really want to come back to school if I'm only going to be a 29th pick, right? Maybe not, right? That's still a first rounder, all right? So I think that we're not going to know the answer to that question for a little bit. And I think that the staff knows that they're not going to know that question. And so they're looking at potentially other options, right? I think dissimilarly from what you saw out of Charles Bediako a few years ago, when we had the assumption that Chuck was coming back. The whole time he was in the portal, it was in the draft, the expectation was Charles Bediako was coming back. We built the roster with the expectation Chuck is back. Honestly, it's the reason why Alabama scheduled Purdue against Zach Edey, because it was going to be in Canada and you were going to be able to pay Chuck some of the revenue from that game in his home country. And with the way NIL worked out at that specific moment for foreign players, he was going to be able to get paid, right? That's the whole reason you scheduled Zach Edey and Purdue in Canada, was to help out Chuck. However, Chuck stays in the draft, and it really hurts the team, right? So I think that burned the Nate Oates, and I think that burned the staff from understanding, hey, if a guy is in the draft, we cannot make any assumptions, right? We have to operate under the assumption that he is gone. And if he comes back, that's great, but we have to assume he is gone, right? I think that's why Alabama went after a guy like Cedric Coward. Obviously, Cedric Coward wanted to go to Duke, and you can't blame the guy. The brand of Duke and how well they have done overall, can't blame him. Obviously, props to him. Happy for his decision. We will see how he plays this season, but that's why Alabama goes after a guy like that. I think there's still some other guys out there potentially that Alabama could go after. They are keeping all of those names very hush-hush. Even with Cedric Coward, we did not hear, and those of us that even pay a lot of attention to this and, are in group chats or in Discords or whatever, we did not hear the name Cedric Coward until Alabama was on the top 5 list, right? And I think that's very intentional, right? Nate Oates and staff have had some issues in the past where when teams hear that Alabama is on a guy, potentially other teams, I think other teams know how Alabama does from an analytics perspective and can see the potential of a player. And so I think Alabama basketball being on a player is potentially an early indicator of like, hey, this guy's really good. So when they see Alabama's name on a list, that potentially drums up some additional interest. I think that also is being used by some agents. They're throwing Alabama's name on a list to potentially drum up some interest for some guys that Alabama may not actually be interested in, right? I think some of these that you hear Alabama's contacted, I don't know if we really did. I think some of that may just be, hey, I want Alabama to be on that list because Alabama's doing so well from a basketball perspective, right? I think there is some of that absolutely happening right now. So the question becomes, where does Alabama turn for 2025, 2026, right? And I think that there's a couple of different options. Option one is the option that I disagree with, right? And I think that it could work out, but it's one that I do not expect to take place because I think that Preston Murphy and Nate Oates are not foolish enough for this to be the case. And option number one is that they say, hey, the roster is set. If LP comes back, that's awesome. If we work things out with Ryland, that's cool. But as of now, the roster is set, and we're placing our expectation that Aiden Holloway is going to have a huge step up in a increased role. That Jalil Bethea, the reason he had problems last season was because he was at Miami, he lost his coach, and he's going to take, again, another huge step up. Latrell Wrightsell is going to be fine after the Achilles injury. He's going to be great. Taylor Bowman is going to be really good. And then Aiden Sherrill, again, in an increased role in his second season, is going to be incredible. I think that is one option. I completely disagree that Nate Oates and Preston Murphy are going to do it, right? I think that would be very foolish because I think that's kind of punting on next season and saying, well, we hope that these guys are really good. That's the least likely expectation in my opinion, because from everything that I have heard, we have NIL available still. Obviously we had the NIL that potentially would be for LeVaron Fallon. We have the NIL available that would have been for Cedric Howard. We have NIL available. So I disagree that that's going to be the case. So the question then becomes, if that's not going to be what happens, what are they going to do and who are they going to pick up? And I think this is one of two things. Option one is going to be that they take some guys from the portal, right? They take guys from the portal. They're on guys in the portal today. They're on guys in the in the NBA draft today. And those guys that they're on in the NBA draft and in the portal, they don't want anyone to know that that's who they're interested in. And they don't want anybody to know, hey, that's who Alabama's coming after. Because they know if people find out that Alabama's talking to these guys, that means one of two things. That means, A, the price of those guys is going to go up. And it also means people will understand, hey, maybe these guys aren't as set on, returning to their original team or aren't as set as staying on the NBA draft as they may be leading on. So if they find out that Alabama is talking to these guys, it could increase the price of some of these players that Alabama may potentially be on. So that could be a huge reason why you're not hearing any information about Alabama's potential targets in the portal or in the NBA draft today, right? Very logical possibility. That is a real thing. The other possibility, and this is something that we kind of talked about in the Discord, and I think is another possibility, is that Alabama is targeting a potential reclass candidate from 2026. If you've looked on Twitter over the past few days, Alabama has actually visited 5 different guards, right? You've got Jackson Richardson, there's Caleb Holt, and others, right? And because Alabama has visited these guys, it's a situation where Alabama obviously, is getting early on the recruiting trail. That's great to hear, great to see. I'm trying to see if you could potentially get in early with some of these guys. Maybe you got in late with some of the previous year's recruits, and that's why you weren't able to land a guy like Boogie Fland or some of the others which Alabama has tried to land, right? So maybe that's a possibility. Or maybe it's a possibility of you're going after a potential reclass, because that's what you want to get from a guard perspective, and you have another idea of what you want to go from the wing standpoint, whether it be Ryland or someone else, right? That's another real possibility, is that Alabama is going to go after a guard, because if you look at the way that college basketball works today, a guard as a freshman is a much better idea than a wing or a front court guy as a freshman. Guards can contribute as freshmen much more, right? So since that's the case, it would not shock me if that is the case, right? They could just be going after guys and, getting in early on the recruiting trail. It just seems a little odd that Alabama has started recruiting the 2026 guys while the transfer portal is still open and while everything is going. That's not something we've seen over the last couple of years. Obviously, they may just be changing up their recruiting strategy slightly and getting out early on those guys. That may be a possibility, right? There may not be a reclass. This is purely speculation, purely some stuff we had talked about in the Discord that I just want to kind of bring to you guys and let y'all know about. This is one of the things that I think is definitely a possibility. Would be very curious to see if that happens. Obviously, I don't think that Preston Murphy and Nate Oates are punting on next season. They're too competitive of guys. These are guys that definitely care about the roster, care about winning too much. This is not something that they're going to take very lightly. So I'm sure they have a plan. I'm just curious what that plan is. But I do think over the next month or so, we're going to find out what that plan is. And of course, I will be here to cover it. So I will have episodes coming out every 2 weeks or twice a week if possible. That is my plan throughout the summer, is to have 2 episodes a week. Additionally, as the transfer portal and everything wraps up for basketball, I will also get into some football content before before fall football practice and before the fall rolls around. I will additionally have some other information once we have the roster fully set from basketball as to who I think my official starting five is, what I think some of the rotation looks like, any potential 2026 recruits that are visiting. I will, of course, cover it all as much as I can. If there's anything that anybody wants me to cover, throw it down in the comments. I read all of them. I comment on as many of them as I can. I really do appreciate the support. If you don't follow me on Apple or on Spotify, if you would throw me a follow over there, download the podcast. It really does help me out. My partnership with Believe is a lot of it focused on the audio side of things. So anything that you do over there really does help me out, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and for the support, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.